This is you. You are sitting in the dark in a hotel room in Prague, 47 surveillance feeds glowing across your laptop screen in pale blue silence. A man 3 blocks away scratches his left ear twice, a signal. A woman on the bridge checks her watch. She is not wearing one. A boy kicks a tin can down an alley and does not flinch when a black sedan rolls past. You see all of it. You always see all of it. Most people move through the world with their eyes wide open and their minds locked shut. You have never had that luxury. You see the micro expression that cracks across a diplomat's face before the lie forms. You see the asymmetry in a building's exhaust vents that tells you where the server room is hidden. You see the specific curl of a man's fingers at the moment he makes a decision he cannot take back. You are 32 years old. You work for an organization so deep in the machinery of power that it has no official name, only a designation whispered in classified briefings, the registry. And tonight, feed number 31 just showed you something that will unravel the last 15 years of your life. A woman, dark hair, a crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow. Your sister has been dead for 22 years. Level 1, the archive. You grew up in a city that smelled like rust and river water. Your mother worked night shifts at a textile mill. Your father was a cartographer, a man who spent his life drawing the shapes of places that other people would never see. He used to spread enormous paper maps across the kitchen table after dinner and trace mountain ranges with his index finger, teaching you that the most important thing about any map was not what it showed, but what it chose to leave out. You were 10 when your sister Mara went into the water and didn't come back. The lake behind the rail yard, a gray November afternoon. You were supposed to be watching her. You were not watching her. You were reading a book about the architecture of bridges. After that, you watched everything. You watched the way grief moves through a household, the particular silence at the dinner table, the way your father began folding his maps instead of spreading them, the way your mother stopped humming to herself after midnight. You cataloged it all in a small notebook with a red cover, not because you were cold, because watching was the only thing that made the world feel like it still had an order to it. By 16, you were reading 5 languages and had memorized the floor plans of every government building in the capital, not to break in, simply because the information existed and your mind was a room with infinite shelves. The registry found you during your 2nd year of university. A professor you trusted handed you a business card with nothing on it but a phone number. You have a gift, she said. There are people who have been looking for someone like you for a very long time. You called the number. That was the first decision you could not take back. Level 2, the School of Still Water. The facility was on the coast of Iceland, where the wind came off the North Atlantic in sheets of frozen glass. There were 11 of you in the intake group. By the end of the first month, there were 6. No one was harmed. The others simply could not endure the particular silence of the place. The registry did not want soldiers. It wanted instruments of precision. Your instructor was a woman named Lena, who moved through rooms like smoke and had eyes the color of old ice. She called herself Cairo. She never explained why. You learned not to ask questions that did not have operational value. Cairo taught you that surveillance was not about watching. It was about understanding the grammar of behavior. Every human being, she said, speaks 2 languages simultaneously, the one that comes out of their mouth and the one that comes out of their body. Your job was to become fluent in the second one. She put you in a white room with a 2-way mirror and had you observe strangers for 8 hours a day. She gave you no instructions, just a notepad. At the end of each session, she would ask you one question. What did they want? Not what did they do? What did they want? It took you 4 months to understand the difference. At night, you kept a photograph of Mara under your mattress, the last one taken before she was gone, 7 years old, squinting into summer sunlight, holding a paper boat she had folded herself. You told yourself you were keeping it as an anchor, a reminder of what it felt like to be a person before you became an instrument. What you did not know, lying in that narrow bed in Iceland, was that the registry already knew about Mara. They had known before they ever handed you that blank business card. Level 3, the field, first deployment. Istanbul, summer. The air tasted of salt and exhaust, and something sweet that might have been jasmine, or might have been the memory of jasmine. Your first solo deployment. You were embedded as a translator at an international trade summit. Your actual assignment? Identify which of the 12 delegates in room 4C was feeding shipping route intelligence to a competing network. You had no weapon. You had a press badge, watch, a recording pen, and 4 days. On the first day, you watched. On the second day, you cataloged. On the third day, you noticed that the delegate from the Northern Coalition, a careful, soft-spoken man named Voss, who wore the same gray tie every day, paused for exactly 2 seconds longer than anyone else every time the name of a specific port city was mentioned. Not a flinch, not a tell. A pause. 2 seconds. You only caught it because Cairo had spent 3 months training you to count the space between things. On the fourth day, you left a single folded note on Voss's dinner plate. It said, "I know, leave before Tuesday. Don't come back." No name, no threat. Just information, which is the most powerful currency in the world. Voss was on a plane by midnight. The network he had been feeding collapsed within the week. Cairo called you from a number you had never seen before. How did you know it was him? He paused, you said. A long silence on the line. Then, welcome to the field. You should have felt proud. Instead, you sat on the edge of your hotel bed and looked out at the lights of the Bosphorus and felt nothing at all. You were beginning to understand that the ability to see everything was not a skill, it was a cage, and you had been living inside it so long you had stopped noticing the bars. Level 4, the registry, the machine. For 7 years, you were the registry's most valuable instrument. You worked in cities that blurred together: Seoul, Nairobi, Lisbon, Montreal. You identified moles, exposed double agents, mapped corruption networks that governments had been chasing for decades. You did it without violence, without drama, without leaving a trace. The registry gave you a handler named Dresh, a meticulous man with clean fingernails and the specific kind of blankness in his eyes that comes not from emptiness, but from having made peace with things that most people cannot look at directly. He gave you assignments on encrypted tablets that dissolved their own data after reading. He never asked about your methods. He only asked about results. You delivered results. You told yourself that the work mattered, that the information you gathered kept disasters from happening, that somewhere a bridge stayed standing because you spotted the weakness in the load-bearing column before it could be exploited. You used your father's language for it: structural integrity, foundational support, the physics of holding things together. The photograph of Mara stayed under your mattress in every city. You carried it the way other people carry a lucky coin or a prayer, a talisman against the particular emptiness of the work. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in a secure operations room in Seoul, you were running a routine audit of registry archive files, background noise, administrative work, when a file path led you somewhere it was not supposed to lead. A subfolder, designation, Ghost Archive, access, archivist only. You were inside it in 11 seconds. The first document you opened was a surveillance photograph. A woman with dark hair and a crescent-shaped scar above her left eyebrow, sitting at a cafe table in Reykjavik, looking directly at the camera. The date on the photograph was 3 years ago. Your hands had stopped moving over the keyboard. The room was very cold. Outside the window, Seoul hummed with its 10 million lives, none of them aware that somewhere inside a glass tower, a person who saw everything was, for the first time, unable to see at all. Level 5, the crack in the foundation, turning point. You spent 72 hours inside the Ghost Archive. What you found was not a conspiracy. It was worse than that. It was a system. Elegant, patient, and invisible. The kind of structure that only someone who understood architecture at the deepest level could have designed. The registry had not just been gathering intelligence. For over 2 decades, it had been shaping outcomes. Elections, markets, borders, disappearances. It had been removing people who asked the right questions. And it had been doing it by using the very analysts it employed as unwitting instruments of its design. You had been one of those instruments. Mara, your sister, had not drowned. She had been taken. At 7 years old, the daughter of a cartographer whose maps showed things the registry needed to remain hidden, she had been removed and placed inside a long-term identity reassignment program. A program designed to create operatives with no traceable past, no family connections, no anchor. They had made her into a version of what they had tried to make you. The difference difference was, they had taken her memories. They had not taken yours. You sat in the dark of the operations room for a long time. On the screen in front of you was the registry's entire organizational blueprint, 22 years of hidden structure laid out like the floor plan of a cathedral. You were the only person outside the archivist's inner circle who had ever seen it. The question was not what to do with it. You had known that from the moment you opened the first file. The question was whether you were willing to pay the price. You thought about your father's voice. If the foundation is weak, the heavens will come crashing down. You began to make a copy. Level 6, the Hunter, Extraction. You had 6 hours before the archive access log triggered an automatic security review. You used 4 of them to extract what you needed and 2 of them to disappear. Not physically, not yet. First, you disappeared from the registry's systems. You had spent 7 years learning exactly how the registry watched its own people. Every pattern, every tripwire, every algorithmic flag. You used that knowledge the way a locksmith uses the knowledge of a lock, not to force it open, but to move through it without resistance. By the time Dresh sent the first alert to your tablet was at the bottom of the Han River. Cairo found you before the registry did. Of course she did. She had been the one who trained you after all. She was waiting at the bottom of the stairwell of a building you had used as a dead drop 3 years before, leaning against the wall with her arms folded and that particular stillness she had that made her look like a feature of the architecture. "You found the archive," she said, not a question. "Did you know?" you asked. A long pause. "I suspected." "About Mara?" She looked at you then. For the first time in all the years you had known her, Cairo looked tired. "That is why I chose you," she said quietly. "I thought if I trained you well enough, you would eventually find it yourself. I could not be the one to look." You wanted to be angry. You had the architecture of anger ready, the load-bearing columns of betrayal, the weight of it. But what came out instead was something quieter and more dangerous. "Where is she?" you said. Cairo reached into her coat and handed you a single folded piece of paper, a street address, Reykjavik. "They're going to come for you," she said. "I know," you said. "Let them." Level 7, the frequency. The registry sent 4 teams. You know this because you watched them being dispatched on a surveillance feed you had quietly kept access to through a ghost node you built 2 years ago during a deployment you were never meant to fully complete. This was the advantage of being an architect of systems. You always built the door before you built the wall. Prague, Vienna, a cargo train through the Austrian mountains, 3 days without sleep. You ate from vending machines and counted your own pulse to stay calm, the way Cairo had taught you. 40 beats per minute. Slow the heart, still the hand, see clearly. The teams were good. 2 of them had been trained by you indirectly. You had written the surveillance protocols they were using to track you. You wrote different ones for yourself. On the second night, in a safe house above a watchmaker's shop in Vienna, you did something you had not done in years. You spread the registry's organizational blueprint across the floor and sat in the middle of it and looked at the whole structure at once, not as a collection of documents, but as a single design. The way your father had looked at his maps, the way you had once looked at bridge schematics, and you found it. The weakness. Not a person, not a file. A single thread of financial architecture that, if pulled correctly, would cause the entire structure to collapse inward. Not with noise, not with violence, with the patient, irresistible force of gravity. You thought about Mara, about a paper boat on a gray lake, about a photograph that had lived under your mattress in 17 different cities. You picked up a borrowed phone and made a single call to a journalist in Oslo whose encrypted line you had memorized 4 years ago for a reason you had never been able to fully explain to yourself. "I have something for you," you said, "but first I need 24 hours. Level 8, the confrontation, the archivist. You found the archivist not in a fortress, not in a bunker, in a small, unremarkable house on the edge of a forest outside Geneva, surrounded by bookshelves and the specific quiet of a person who has nothing left to fear. She was 71 years old, and she opened the door herself, as though she had been expecting you. Perhaps she had. She was, after all, the person who had built the system you worked inside. She had seen this coming the moment you accessed the ghost archive. She offered you tea. You stood. "You think I'm a monster," she said, settling into a chair. "I think you're an architect," you said, "like my father. The difference is he built things for people to live in." She looked at you for a long time. The house was very still. Somewhere, a clock was ticking with the particular rhythm of old mechanical things, the sound of small, perfect gears turning in sequence. "I built the registry to prevent wars," she said. "I have documents, incidents, crises, 3 separate nuclear escalations that never happened because of what we did. You took my sister when she was 7 years old," you said. The clock ticked. The archivist closed her eyes. "The drive you copied," she said finally. "If you release it, the registry collapses, and so do the protections. Every asset asset, every operative, every ongoing operation. I know, you said. People will die. People have died, you said. The question is whether the dying was for the structure or for the people. Your answer was always the structure. That's where we're different. You set a copy of the drive on her coffee table. You turned and walked to the door. What are you going to do? She called after you. The same thing I've always done, you said. Look at the load-bearing column and apply the right pressure. Level 9, the collapse, dismantling. You did not release the full archive to the journalist. You released a single thread. The financial structure, the one you had identified on the floor of the Vienna safe house. Specific accounts, specific flows, specific names. Enough to pull at the corner of the fabric without tearing down every wall at once. What followed over the next 4 months was not a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet one. The kind that happens when a foundation shifts. Not an explosion, but a slow, irreversible settling. 3 governments opened inquiries. 7 senior registry figures resigned or disappeared. The network of operations that had run unseen for 22 years began to surface, piece by piece, in the way that things buried for too long eventually surface. Cairo went dark. You did not look for her. She had given you the address in Reykjavik. That was her accounting. Dresch was arrested in a hotel lobby in Frankfurt, holding a briefcase and wearing the same clean fingernailed expression he had always worn. You watched it on a news feed from a rented room in a city you will not name here. You felt no satisfaction, only the particular silence that follows the removal of a sound you have been hearing for so long you had stopped registering it as sound. You found Mara in Reykjavik. She was living under a name you did not recognize, in a small apartment near the harbor, with a view of the water and walls covered in maps. Your father's daughter, after all. She did not remember you. The registry had been thorough. You sat across from her at a kitchen table, and you did not tell her who you were. You told her instead that there were some documents she should look at and some people she should talk to, and that the story of her life before the name she currently wore was more complex and more hers than she had been allowed to know. She listened. She was very still. She had your father's eyes and your mother's silence. When you stood to leave, she said, "You know me from somewhere." "Yes," you said. "Will you tell me?" You looked at her for a long moment, at the scar above her eyebrow, at the maps on her walls. "When you're ready," you said, "I'll tell you everything." Level 10, the cartographer's son. The ending. You are 34 years old. You are sitting at a table in a village near the Portuguese coast. The air smells like salt and old stone and the particular sweetness of mimosa trees in the late afternoon sun. You have a different name. You have a face that has been unmemorable for so long that it has become your actual face. On the table in front of you, a blank sheet of paper, a drafting pencil, the first clean surface you have sat with in 15 years. You think about what your father said, that the most important thing about any map is not what it shows, but what it chooses to leave out. You used to think that was a lesson about concealment, about the power of hidden information. Now you understand it differently. He was talking about intention, about the choices a person makes when they decide what to draw and what to leave as open space. You pick up the pencil. You are not drawing a floor plan, not a vault layout, not the structural weakness of a building or the escape routes of a compound. You are drawing the coastline outside the window, rough and imprecise and full of the specific mistakes of a person learning something for the first time. Your phone buzzes, a message from an encrypted address you recognize, a sequence of numbers Mara has started using in the last month as she pieces together the language of what she is and where she came from. The message says, "I found a photograph, a lake, a paper boat. I think I remember." You set the phone down. The coastline on your paper is still unfinished. You look at it for a long time. Then you pick up the pencil and you keep drawing. You are the eye that saw everything. You spent 15 years inside a machine that used sight as a weapon. You dismantled it the only way it could be dismantled, not with force, but with the patient application of truth to the exact point where the structure was weakest. The world still does not know your name. That is fine. You are done being an instrument. You are done being a ghost. The map you are drawing has no legend, no scale, no key. It is simply the shape of the world outside your window, drawn by a person who is, for the first time in a very long time, sitting still in it. Some things can only be built after the false ones have fallen.